But what we're going to move from the past into the future. What's the future like for Andy?
You know, I've written a couple of books, and I'm promoting one book. It's called Solomea, Star of Opera's Golden Age, and it's a story about my great aunt who was the world's leading soprano in the golden age of opera in the first decade of the. That book relates a story about her contribution to the opera Madame Butterfly, making it a success worldwide. And perhaps this would be a good story to kind of finish our meeting with. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to tell that story.
Absolutely.
Puccini, who was one of the world's great composers, had a winning streak for quite a while, and he was looking for a new opera to write. And he didn't have anything immediately available, so he took a trip to London. In London, there was a play that was put on called Butterfly. And it was the story of a Japanese geisha girl who fell in love with an American naval officer who had come to Japan in the 1800s to open up Japan, because Japan up until that time had been a closed society. But the American Navy came in and they opened up Japan to become a modern state. And she was in Nagasaki, a geisha girl, which is someone who entertained women. I'm sorry, not women, men, in geisha clubs, etc. So the story is they develop a relationship, a romantic relationship. And Pinkerton, the American naval officer, actually goes through a form of a ceremony, a marriage ceremony with this girl whose name is Chiyo-Chiyo-san, which is Japanese for butterfly, Chiyo-Chiyo-san. And she's just a teenager. And they sleep together. And he announces to her, look, I'm being called to go back to America, so I'm going to have to leave you. And she's traumatized that he's going to be leaving. But he says, don't worry, I'll come back. I'll come back. And she said, well, okay. So he leaves. And she waits for him, pining for his return. But it takes years and years before he returns. He only returns something like 5 years later. But in the meantime, unknown to him, Chiyo-Chiyo-san gives birth to his son, was pregnant and gave birth to his son and raises his son. So when he returns to Japan, Pinkerton learns of the boy, and a crisis develops. The crisis is this boy going to live with? Is he going to continue and grow up with the geisha girl? Or is he going to go with his father back to America and with the father's new wife? And they discuss it and decide it's best for the boy to go back to America. And in one of the final scenes of that opera, Chiyo-Chiyo's son draws her boy off to the side and says this to him. She says, look at this face. It's the face of your mother. Remember it. You will never see it again. And following that, she gives the son off to Pinkerton, who takes him off to America while she commits suicide. That's the end of the story of the Madame Butterfly opera. So this story, the play, was staged in London, and Puccini fell in love with it and insisted to the playwright that he give him the rights to stage this opera. And Puccini, like the guy wrote about Puccini, meeting Puccini, he says, what do you do when a hot-blooded Italian grabs you by the neck and says, give me your play, the rights to your play. You have to give up the rights. And he gave up the rights. And Puccini then took the rights, went to Milan in Italy to stage the opera at La Scala, the premier opera stage in the world. And to play the roles, he hired two of the top people who were in opera at that time, a lady named Rosina Storchio, who was a soprano, and a guy named Zanatello, who was a tenor, and a few other top names. And they rehearsed, and they were going to put the opera on La Scala stage in 1904. Well, Puccini was so confident of the success of his opera that, unlike in all other operas that he ever staged, he decided to invite his son and his sister to the premiere of the opera. And when the premiere came that night, they were in the audience. And Puccini was, for some reason, very nervous, very, concerned about the success of the opera, so much so that he's smoking away, on the stage in the side. And he's talking to the performers, and they're all nervous. And even like Storchio wrote in her memoirs that she was very nervous about something was just not working that night. So that when they staged the opera, when they performed, the audience started booing in the middle of the opera, whistling and hissing, shouting out, La Bohème, La Bohème, as if this opera was repeating some of the stuff from the other opera, La Bohème. And to the point where by the end of the opera, we're just crestfallen by the fact that it was booed out. The next day in the papers, all the newspaper headlines, Puccini fails, opera, disaster, and so on. Puccini is just crestfallen. He doesn't know what to do. And he figures, well, he'll go to his friend Arturo Toscanini, who was a Greek director at that time, to seek advice. And Toscanini said, there's only one person who can help you save this opera, and her name is Solomea Krushelnytska, who was my great aunt. Now, at that time, Solomea had already been a star in the opera world. She was at the top of her career. And being asked by Puccini to take on this role and try and restage this opera would be something like asking, say, Julia Roberts to take on a role that Sandra Bullock had in a major movie that was a flop and try and redo the movie and make it a success. I mean, it was a huge risk to her, her stature. But because she was friends with the two, Puccini and Arthur Toscanini, she agreed to do it. And so the two of them in 1904 went to Brescia, Italy, which is about 100 miles east of Milan. And at the Teatro Grande, prepared this opera. Puccini rewrote it with her help. They restaged it. She wore a Japanese outfit for 3 months, solid 3 months, in order to get herself into the role of Chiyo-san, because she was something like 30 years old at the time, and she had to play a teenager. So it was kind of risky. But at any rate, they restaged the opera. And on the opening of that newly staged opera, they were all nervous. Again, Puccini was, chain smoking on the side of the theater stage. The audience was even nervous. Everybody was nervous, thinking, was this thing going to make it or not? But they staged the opera. And as the opera went on, Solomea captivated the fascination of the audience. She had a very beautiful voice, a beautiful, melodious voice. So much so that they started plotting and started asking for the actors to restage parts of the opera, like an instant replay. They sing an aria, and they loved it so much they wanted so they had to re-sing the same aria again. So, and they loved it so much that by the end of the opera, the audience gave them a standing ovation, 7 standing ovations, including pulling Puccini out behind the curtains to take a bow. because of the appreciation of the audience. And the opera went on with Solomea playing Chiu Chiu San for 100 times throughout Europe until on the 100th occasion, when she was finished, she gave the score back to Puccini saying, "That's it. This is the last time I will perform the opera." But in the opera, that was 120 years ago this year. This is the 120th anniversary of the opera Madame Butterfly. And it's one of the top operas beloved in the world. It's one of the top 5 operas of the world, even to this day. So there's a story for you, Bob. From the book Solomea, Star of Opera's Golden Age. And it's not a book about opera so much as it is about human achievement, to do the best you can do in your area that you have chosen as your calling. And breaking the ceiling, the ice, floor, the ceiling for women, trying to make it in a man's world, and about integration, being an outsider, getting accepted in a world where you're normally not accepted.